This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome, everybody, to the Haulin Assets podcast. This is episode number 41. I am Craig, and over there, Chris, welcome.
How you doing, Craig?
I'm all right as somebody in a self-imposed and state-imposed quarantine can be.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of, middle maybe not, but when things have really gotten crazy with the coronavirus outbreak.
COVID-19 is rearing its filthy head.
Locking everything down.
Yep.
Kids are out of school.
But, the kids are out of school. What am I going to do?
Home.
What am I going to do?
Yeah, it's rough.
All right. Well, anyway, luckily we're not in a room with 50 or more people, so we didn't have to cancel the podcast. We can continue this show, and today we are going to be talking about something that actually does pertain to that. And so if you're looking for that sweet, hot coronavirus content, we got it for you. At least a little bit today.
We're going to be talking a lot about safety regulations. We mentioned last week in the podcast that we were going to do a 3-part series on some of the regulations and audits and different things like that. So this is the first part of that episode where we're really just going to kind of break it down and talk a little bit about what the FMCSA program is, the CSA program, compliance, safety, accountability, and kind of go from there and expand on that. The next one's going to be about the DOT safety audits, and then the last one's going to be more specific, DOT safety audits, but specific to my experience with the new entrant safety audit.
Right. Now, before we get to all of that, I will just remind everybody, go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes. In fact, this episode, I've seen them in advance. The show notes are extensive. I'm not going to be able to put them all in the show notes that you see on whatever player you're using. And so use that click through to go to Haulin Assets LLC and check out the full show notes. It's going to have a lot of the details that we'll be talking about today. The other things I was going to mention, find us on Facebook and leave a review if you would be so kind. If you enjoy what we do here, we would much appreciate that review. Now, Chris, FMCSA CSA might be my favorite acronym of all time.
Well, it's really two acronyms together. So FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, CSA program,
right,
which is Compliance, Safety, and Accountability. That's really the program that the FMCSA uses to manage their regulatory compliance.
Yeah. The only thing that comes close to FMCSA's CSA is some of the stuff that comes out of Congress with the bizarre acronyms, to make sure that they spell some relevant word.
Well, it takes a government agency to really be able to come up with the good acronyms.
Absolutely. Okay, so tell me again. FMCSA stands for Federal Motor Carrier
Safety Administration. So that's the department.
Got it.
Of the government. It's a section of the DOT, the Department of Transportation, a subsection. Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the ones that really manage the trucking industry.
Gotcha. And then the second part of that,
the CSA program is, like I'd mentioned, the compliance, safety, and accountability, and that's really what the FMCSA uses to manage that whole regulatory environment that motor carriers have to follow.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's what we're going to be going over today. Now, you actually pulled up a pretty relevant news item before we even started. Do you want to bring that up now? Because it is relevant to the COVID-19 thing, or do you want to bring that up a little bit later?
No, let's go ahead and talk about it now. So, I just this morning, the FMCSA announced that they are going to suspend hours of service regulations for motor carriers who are in support of the COVID-19, the coronavirus relief. And so, I just kind of really skimmed it just really quickly, but it's all 50 states. So the FMCSA does this on occasions, like when there's hurricanes or some kind of natural disaster like that, they'll, over a certain smaller geographical area, they will suspend those regulations for companies that are helping or providing some kind of support to that relief. This is the first time that I can remember, and I would be willing to bet the first time ever, that they've suspended it for all 50 states.
That is pretty remarkable. I mean, there's every state is going to need whatever help it can get. right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it's kind of interesting. I was reading, you have to be in direct support of the relief effort, but that includes a lot of different things. It was talking about, medical supplies, medical equipment, and even things, emergency restocking of grocery shelves, which, I mean, really, if you haul any kind of grocery, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, you've noticed that the grocery stores have just been decimated with supplies. And so there's lots of empty shelves. So really, I would be willing to bet any kind of grocery items that are being hauled right now, food items, you'd probably fall under that. Like, I am actually tomorrow night, I'm picking up a load of water.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That's going to Costco.
Oh, my goodness.
They've been, Costco's been out of water.
You're going to be like weeks. You're going to be like one of those truck drivers in the zombie movie who's fighting people off the side of the truck.
I'm going to have to make sure I have an extra strong padlock on the on the trailer to make sure nobody tries to break it and steal my bottle of water. I'll be hauling. So that would count, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then after that, I'm picking up a load of potatoes and taking them from Idaho to Atlanta, and I'm sure that would count too.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
I haven't really decided how I'm going to try to, manage my hours of service time hauling those two loads, but it's nice to have, I'll be able to kind of, within reason, get there as quick as I can and, hopefully help keep people fed.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I hope it's okay if, the non-trucker in the room is the one who says this, but with these regulations being waived temporarily for those who are supporting the relief efforts, just recall to mind that they were put in place for a reason. Don't be stupid. Drive safe. Get your appropriate amount of rest as much as you feel like you need, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. It becomes, you've got to self-policing. You got to watch yourself and be careful. As always, even if you can legally drive, if you're tired, pull over, go to sleep. And especially now when you can kind of push through the regulations a little bit, if you're tired, go to sleep, be safe, safety first.
Okay. So as we dive into the FMCSA, CSA, there was one thing that we wanted to start with, was a photo that was sent, right?
Yeah. We finally had a contestant winner that snapped the picture of me driving down the road.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It happened in Atlanta. So, a long ways away from home. It was pretty cool. It was Brent. Neat story. He's just about to have another baby. His wife's, I think it sounds like about ready to pop. And so the Amazon gift card came at a very opportune time, and he was super excited. I was excited. It's been kind of cool. And the other thing that's kind of funny with that is I've had two guys in the last, couple of days, one take another picture, and a second guy that actually stopped me at a receiver where I was dropping off a load, and he's all like, "Are you Chris?" Like, yeah.
No way.
So, yeah.
Hey, how about that?
Pulled me aside, listens to a podcast listener, and that's pretty cool.
That is cool. You've been recognized in public. I think you're able to join some kind of union now for famous people.
the union for not so famous people.
That's right. The Faces for Radio union. Well, that's great. Congratulations, Brent. You have now accomplished something that I have not, and I live locally. I've never seen Chris on the road yet. I'm looking forward to it.
Craig still thinks it's a rumor that I actually get out in the truck and drive.
I'm convinced that you just have a robot do it so you can sleep in the back.
That'd be nice.
Okay, well, congratulations, Brent. Chris, where do we want to start off talking about the broad strokes? Now that we've talked about the exceptions for the FMCSA's regulations, where do you want to start in talking about it generally? What do people need to know?
Well, first and foremost, compliance, it's a necessary evil. It's one of those things that you absolutely have to do. If you don't do it, you're going to get yourself in trouble. I've seen way too many companies that just don't pay any attention to it and eventually get shut down because they don't do it. And one of two things happens down. It's not always the government that shuts you down if you're not managing the compliance thing. Sometimes they do, but what also happens is, the government may not shut you down, but they may give you a conditional rating, which then makes it harder to get loads, and your insurance company might start charging you more money. And so then at that point, if you're getting paid less on your loads, your expenses are increased. You just, some guys can't stay in business under those kind of conditions. And so that's what actually ends up putting them out of business are those kind of things. So it's not directly the FMCSA doing it, but it still happens because they didn't follow the regs.
Now, following these regulations, as you say, it's something you want to do. It's something that can put you out of business. And this is something that you have experience helping guys with, right?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of the things that Motor Carrier HQ does. We help people stay, understand the regulations, stay in compliance with them. We help them with things like the drug and alcohol program, and really just give them a kind of a system that they can follow that will help them through it. And really the regulations and the compliance, it's not rocket science. It's not super difficult. In fact, there's been a lot of times when I've worked with specific clients, this may be kind of mean, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's been some guys that I've helped through the process that have been able to successfully manage it, where I've said, if this guy can do it, anybody can do it.
As long as you don't name names,
I'm
all
not
right
naming
with that.
any names, but it's really truly it's a matter of effort, and it's a matter of making it a priority. As long as people will make it a priority and put a little bit of effort into it, anybody can do it. Especially with some help from Motor Carrier HQ. We've got an audit program. It's called the Audit Assistance Package. That's kind of a do-it-yourself program to help people know what they need to do, what records they need to keep, and that kind of thing. And if people are doing that and following like the hours of service rules, and not driving their trucks 80 miles an hour through 40 mile an hour zones, they'll be okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Now, you've said that not following these regulations could result in either being shut down, which is maybe the less likely course, or at least being kind of soft shut down, right? Your rates go down, your insurance rates go up. So how do you prevent all this from happening?
So one of my quotes and favorite quotes in the entire world comes from Ben Franklin. And he said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I really feel like in this case, that ounce of prevention is really worth a metric ton of cure.
A metric ton?
A metric ton, yeah.
Okay, this is America, Chris. Why a metric ton?
Because it's bigger than a regular ton.
Okay.
And since I've always had this question, and since we're talking about tonnage, you hear about, the imperial ton, which we're familiar with here in the U.S., the metric ton, which everybody else in the world uses. And then you also always hear about a shit ton. So what's bigger, a metric ton, a shit ton? What's bigger of those two?
I'm going to go shit ton on this one. Has got to be the biggest.
I kind of like that. So maybe we ought to say that this ounce of prevention is really worth a shit ton of cure in this situation.
We're really earning the explicit rating this week on the podcast, right, Chris?
Oh, I guess we are. Don't let your kids listen to this episode.
Okay, so we've got a shit ton of prevention now that we can do. Well, no, wait, that's not even right, is it? I'm no Ben Franklin. Let's put it that way.
We're at an ounce of prevention for a shit ton of cure.
So what is prevention? What's an ounce of prevention look like then?
Well, an ounce of prevention is really just kind of staying ahead of it, and not waiting until you're getting audited, or not waiting until you're having issues before you really start trying to, one, follow the regulations, and two, trying to keep the records. So let's kind of take a little bit of a step back here at this point and really kind of talk about, okay, this CSA program, the Compliance Safety Accountability Program, and what it's designed to do. And there's really, I feel like, 4 things that this is designed to do. First, identify motor carriers that pose a safety hazard. 2, intervene with identified motor carriers so that they can correct their safety problems. 3, assign motor carriers safety ratings. And then 4, prohibit motor carriers that receive unsatisfactory safety ratings from operating commercial motor vehicles. So I think as we kind of go forward, let's break down each one of those items and talk about them in a little bit more detail.
Okay, so you said they want to, first of all, identify problematic carriers, right?
Yep.
So how do they go about doing that?
There's kind of 3 main ways that happens. The first, and a new motor carrier like me is going to go through what's called a new entrant safety audit. The 3rd episode of this series, we're going to go into great detail on exactly what that new entrant safety audit is. We're going to talk about my experience with mine. I just had mine completed a couple weeks ago. So that's one way they identify them. So if you go through a new entrant safety audit and they see issues, that's how they're going to say, okay, this guy's got problems. We're going to have to ratchet up our screws on this guy a little bit.
Okay. All right. What else?
The biggest and most common for all motor carriers is really roadside inspections. So you know how trucks get pulled into a port, And the inspector, we've talked about this. I've had it happen. They pull you inside and say, hey, I'm going to do an inspection. They look at your vehicle. They look at your hours of service logs and a bunch of other things. And when they see issues, it gets annotated and it gets input into what's called the safety measurement system. And that's really kind of how they issue each motor carrier kind of a score based on how well they follow or how well they don't, or how poorly they don't follow the regulations.
Right. Now, luckily for you, Chris, you are starting to get pretty famous. So when you get pulled into these ports, you'll be able to, don't you know who I am? Look at my truck. Yeah. And they'll just let you go.
I've tried that before. It doesn't work, especially with my wife. Yeah. I can't use that. Don't you know who I am? Line. Yeah. It never goes well.
No, okay. All right. So what was the third thing? You said there was a third option, right, for how they identify?
Yeah, if you get in a bad accident.
Oh,
so if you get in an accident, they're going to, especially if it's a bad one, if there's serious injury or death or anything like that, you're probably going to get audited.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's kind of just standard operating procedure. It doesn't matter if you're at fault.
It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. They often say if an accident involves hearse, nurse, or tow, it's a little bit higher. So a hearse, if it kills somebody, a nurse causes some significant hospitalization, or if vehicles have to get towed, chances are that you're going to get looked at a little bit more in more detail, in more depth, especially if it's the hearse or nurse. If it causes a death or a serious hospitalization, you can bet that there's a good chance the FMCSA, the DOT, is going to kind of look at your situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And it may not result in anything, especially if it wasn't your fault. But there's still just to kind of dot their I's and cross their T's. They're going to look at you a little bit more and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Doesn't seem horribly unreasonable from where I'm sitting.
No, it's really not.
Okay. So you said the second thing they're going to do after they identify potentially problematic carriers is they're going to intervene. This sounds terrifying, right? Oh no, they're going to intervene. What does this mean?
Yeah, the intervention is one of those things that you want to try to avoid as much as you can. So this is where the prevention comes in. If you're doing the things right up front and you're following the hours of service regulations and you get inspected, or you do your new entrant audit and you pass that with flying colors, you're going to kind of stay underneath the radar. But if you don't, if you have bad safety inspections or you fail your new entrant audit or any other kind of audit, they're going to kind of keep ratcheting things up. And so I've kind of ordered these and listed them. We'll have them in the show notes, obviously. But the interventions, they start out light and then they get worse and worse and worse. And if you get this first intervention and you kind of fix things and improve things, then they're probably going to, lay off you a little bit. But if you keep getting worse and worse and worse, they're just going to keep tightening and tightening and tightening until all of a sudden you're getting a full blown on-site safety audit and getting a reduction in your safety rating. And, it just kind of goes downhill from there.
So, but what are some of the potential things they could do leading up to that? Not quite as bad as that.
So the first thing they do is they issue what's called a warning letter. And the warning letter is basically going to state, these are areas where we're seeing you're not following compliance regulations. So maybe they are noticing because of roadside inspections that you've had too many out of service or not hours of service issues. So you're not following the hours of service rules. You're driving too long. You're not taking your 30-minute break after 8 hours of drive or on duty, and you're just not doing those kind of things. And so they see that you're not following those regulations out of proportion with everybody else. So you're worse than average, basically.
Gotcha. So as long as you're within the norm, you're probably going to be okay on a lot of that stuff.
Typically, they're going to want to focus their efforts on the worst offenders. So you can still have little tiny issues here and there, but if your issues are less frequent than most carriers your size, they're still probably going to focus their efforts on somebody else. They may send you a warning letter, but that may be as high as it gets. But usually what happens after that, once they send the warning letter, if your CSA scores are again above that average, they're going to do what's called targeted roadside inspections.
And so they're going to seek you out.
They're going to seek you out. And you can actually see what your, it's called this ISS inspection selection score. So if you go into the FMCSA portal, and if you don't know what that FMCSA portal is, I'm going to have it in the show notes. I also have a video that I created that kind of shows you the basics of the portal, how to log in, and it will specifically go in and show you where you can find what your inspection selection score is, your ISS score. I do it in Haulin Assets I actually log into Haulin Assets portal, show you what my score is, and talk a little bit more. But there's basically your score itself is a numeric number, I think 1 to 100, and depending on what your score is, you're going to get one of 3 inspection rates. So the first one is inspect. That means if you get pulled into a port and your rating is inspect, you're probably going to be inspected unless they're super busy inspecting other people. But if they're open, you get pulled in, you're probably going to get inspected. The next one is optional. And that's actually what Haulin Assets is right now, is optional. That means they can pull you in, but they don't have to. And
is that you have this status simply because of the age of the company? Because
of the age of the company, yeah. Because I'm a new entrant, they kind of put new entrants a little bit more under a microscope. And so I'm assuming that's why it is. I'm pretty confident that's the reason, is every new entrant's optional until you get through the new entrant program, which is 18 months. We'll talk a little bit more about that in that third
kind
episode.
Of a probationary period until you get to, you said there's a third status, and I assume that's green light go.
Green light go. So unless they've got, unless they see like you're driving down the road with missing a tire or, something super blatantly obvious that's an issue with your truck or something like that, they're probably just every time going to let you pass through.
Let you go. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Now, is there anything else that they might do in this intervention category that we want to go over?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few more things. And this is where it kind of continues to get ratcheted up. Like, so if you say you get that inspect, you're listed as an inspect. So they're going to start pulling you in almost every time to inspect. And if you haven't fixed those problems and you're continuing to have the same problems, things are just going to get worse and worse and worse for you, because eventually what's going to happen is they're going to do an investigation or an audit. An investigation is an audit. They sometimes call it investigation. They sometimes call it an audit. And there's different levels of audits. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. The first one's an offsite investigation, where they may, for instance, if you're having issues with your hours of service, they just may say, hey, we want you to upload through your ELD system 30 days worth of logs or 3 months worth of logs or something like that. And along with the supporting documentation, they're just going to want to see that, a few specific pieces, especially where they think you're having issues.
Okay. All right. And then if the offsite, you mentioned on-site earlier, that's the worst thing that can happen. Is that what comes next?
It is. And there's actually different levels of on-site too. So there's on-site focused and on-site comprehensive. So the on-site focused is just, kind of the same thing as the off-site, except for they do it on-site. They're not going to look at everything. You may have great CSA scores as far as vehicle maintenance goes, so they probably won't look at anything when it comes to vehicle maintenance. But then maybe you're struggling on the hours of service thing, and they're just going to focus in on that, those logs. Maybe something else.
Yeah. Okay. And then, but there would be a potentially comprehensive one where there are so many issues and they've come up so many times. We're just going to look at your entire operation.
They're going to look at everything. And the comprehensive isn't necessarily because you're doing bad things. There's other reasons to have a comprehensive on-site inspection. Because the thing with a comprehensive, like if they want to issue you, or if you want to get a satisfactory safety rating, the only way you can get a satisfactory safety rating is if you've been through a comprehensive investigation or a comprehensive audit. If you've just had that focused audit where they only look at a few things, there's tons of downside with those and no upside. And what I mean by that is the only thing that they're going to give you at the end of those is either a conditional or an unsatisfactory safety rating.
That's it. Those are your only possibilities.
Yep. They won't give you a satisfactory safety rating if all you've had is a focused audit. You have to go through that whole comprehensive safety audit where they look at basically everything before they will issue a satisfactory safety rating.
Interesting. Does that mean that I want comprehensive look at that point?
That's kind of the upside of getting one of those, is if you've got your ducks in a row and you're doing things right, you'll get an actual safety rating. And so anybody that looks at your company online, they'll be able to see that, oh, you know what, this guy's got a satisfactory safety rating.
Let me ask you this. If you said if your ducks are in a row, it may not be that big a deal. If my ducks are in a row, am I ever going to get to this point? Am I ever going to get an on-site audit?
You can actually believe this. You can request one.
Oh, really?
Because there are some advantages to have that safety rating, that satisfactory safety rating. And so you can request them. And a lot of the times what happens if a guy's has received a conditional safety rating for some point in the past, you request what's called a safety upgrade request, and you go through that process, and that comprehensive audit, and you can end up with a satisfactory safety rating after that.
Interesting. Okay. So what else in this category do you want to go over? I know there are a couple of more points that I can't remember.
Yeah, that's basically, so you get those ratings or you go through those investigations or those audits, and then after those are done, let's talk a little bit about the results. So typically what happens is you either get a pass, that you've passed the safety audit, or you fail it and you get what's called a notice of violation. And so the notice of violation is going to address all the issues that you've had. It's going to line them out, pretty extensively, and what the issues are and what you've done wrong. And they're going to make you do kind of one of two things. The first one is called a CAP plan. CAP stands for Corrective Action Plan. So the Corrective Action Plan is basically, you're kind of a religious person, aren't you, Craig?
Yeah, more or less.
It's basically the repentance process. So you basically
is that what we're going with here?
That's what we're going with here. Yeah, the Corrective Action Plan is basically, with the FMCSA, is the repentance process. You have to tell them what you've done wrong, how you're going to fix it, and how you're going to prevent it from happening again.
And then if we're going maybe 12-step, we could go 12-step, and like the 9th step, you got to make amends, right?
Yeah, at some point. And you potentially may have to make amends, and that brings us right into the next person. What with the government? What would those amends be?
Oh, so something about money.
Yeah, it usually involves money. You're typically going to have to pay a fine.
Okay, all right.
And so that's the next thing that you could possibly get after the notice of violation, where they tell you all the things you've done wrong. You may also get what's called a notice of claim, where they issue civil penalties and fine you for your transgressions.
I'm going so Catholic now, and I'm thinking of remittances,
you need to go confess, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now this CAP, what do you call it? Corrective Action
Plan.
Mm-hmm. This kind of sounds like the warning letter, but with teeth. A lot more teeth.
It is, yeah, because at this point they've actually gone in and looked at things, and they know you've got issues,
and so
they want you to have a plan of how you're going to fix those issues, and they want to know what that plan is.
Gotcha.
And that's actually another one of those things that Motor Carrier HQ does, is we help guys develop that corrective action plan, provide the paperwork and the documentation to the FMCSA to help you get through that process and through those issues.
So it would tell me about how that would work if somebody came to Motor Carrier HQ and said, "Hey, I need help with my CAP here." Don't they already have the CAP from the FMCSA?
No, because what they've got is the notice of violation, which all that has done is told them what they've done wrong.
Gotcha.
And so the CAP is actually basically your response to that notice of violation, saying, you said we had issues under this regulation, and here is what we did wrong. Here is how we're going to fix it, and here's how we're going to prevent it from happening again. And you have to do that with each one of those violations that you've had.
Gotcha.
And if your violations are bad enough, you may have to ratchet up even more, because if they've come out and said you're going to have a conditional rating or a unproposed unsatisfactory rating, they give you time to respond to that, but you may have to actually do what's called a safety upgrade request. I mentioned it briefly, but that's like a CAP plan on steroids. It's way more extensive. You have to provide way more documentation, but that's the kind of situation. A lot of times you're either going to be put out of service, or you're going to have dire consequences if you don't do exactly what they say and really go through that whole safety upgrade process.
And that was going to be my next question. So you mentioned the 4 steps of all this, and the third one was assigning a safety rating. We've already talked about a lot of those. You mentioned you might be unrated, which comes with its own issues. You could be satisfactory. You said conditional.
Unsatisfactory.
Or unsatisfactory,
yeah,
right.
So the unrated is really not a bad thing. That's like right now I'm unrated. If you haven't been through an actual audit, and the new entrant audit isn't going to count for that typically.
Gotcha.
But if you haven't been through either that off-site, on-site focused, or on-site comprehensive audit, you will be unrated. And
only if you do the on-site comprehensive could you get the satisfactory rating.
Yeah. But
interesting.
If you've done an off-site and they find things bad enough, or if you've done an on-site focused or the on-site comprehensive, you can end up with a unsatisfactory or conditional rating. And what happens in that kind of situation is you A lot of times, especially if it's an unsatisfactory, they're not just going to, the day after you get audited, issue you an unsatisfactory safety rating. They're going to give you, I think it's usually about 60 days or 30 or 60 days to respond. And you can come up with that because they're going to say, we're going to give you we propose that you're going to receive an unsatisfactory safety rating. And then they give you time to respond to that, do a safety upgrade request so that instead of getting the unsatisfactory rating, they're going to end up giving you a conditional rating.
Gotcha. And so,
which you can still operate under a conditional rating.
That's what I was just going to ask.
It's one of those things that causes you issues. Some brokers aren't going to let you haul for them because you have a conditional rating. Your insurance company, when you come to renew your insurance, is probably going to use that as a way to increase your insurance rates. So you want to avoid those at all costs.
Now, if you get the unsatisfactory rating, are you out of commission? You're off the road?
They will not allow you to operate.
Wow. Okay. And so that's, if I understand the timeline correctly, and I'm just trying to work through this here, you get the notice that, hey, we're going to give you X rating, maybe, well, that's a bad way to put it. You're an X-rated trucking company. We're going to give you whatever rating it is. Maybe it's unsatisfactory. And then within those 30 or 60 days, if you have not responded with the proper upgrades, safety upgrades, or whatever it is that you need to do, then that kicks in and you're taken off the road.
Yep.
Right.
If the proposal's to give you an unsatisfactory safety rating, yes, they will take you off the road. If it's lesser, they're probably gonna, it may not be quite as drastic of a consequence, but you're still going to have consequences. You'll still either get that conditional safety rating, or you'll get fines, and then they still kind of keep you on their target list. And so eventually, if you don't fix those things one way or another, you're eventually going to end up with that unsatisfactory safety rating if you don't do what you're supposed to do.
Okay. All right. So ultimately, do you want, because I'm going back and forth on something here that we've kind of mentioned. You want that satisfactory rating. That's sweet. All right, I got a satisfactory rating. But do you want to seek that out? Or would you rather just that the FMCSA not know who you are?
Typically, not knowing who you are is pretty good. So usually you only really need that satisfactory rating for, there are going to be some shippers, like a very few, a small minority, that will only do business with guys that have a satisfactory safety rating. So it's definitely not critical to your business operations to have one. But with that being said, if your ducks are in a row and you're confident that you've done things well, you shouldn't be afraid of a comprehensive safety audit because you've got everything. And again, we'll go into this in the next episode when we really go into detail of what the record keeping requirements are, what's involved in a safety audit. But it's not rocket science. And Motor Carrier HQ has that audit assistance package that can walk you basically through each step of what you need to do, what records you need to have. And as long as you're maintaining that stuff, you're going to be good. And as long as I've never seen a safety auditor, and we've been part of tons of clients that have done safety audits. We oftentimes have clients that don't want to do the safety audit at their location, and they'll come into our office and have the FMCSA or the DOT auditor meet them in our office, and we've been part of it and helped them through it. And auditors typically will give you a little bit of leeway. They don't expect everything to be perfect. They just want to see that you've got a good system. If you've had hours of service regulation violations, that you know how to address them, you address them properly. As long as you're doing that kind of stuff and it's not egregious, you're going to be fine.
Okay. All right. So, gosh, that's a lot of info. And like I said to anybody who's listening, a lot of these details, these are going to be in the show notes. But you may need to click through to get the full show notes. Make sure you get all of those details. It's going to have links, not just to those show notes on HaulinAssetsLLC.com, but also to, I assume, some resources that we can get at MotorCarrierHQ.com, and other things that people will be able to get to navigate all of this stuff, right?
And you can always give Motor Carrier HQ a call and talk to one of our coaches if you have questions about this kind of stuff. They understand the regulations. They understand how to get through that process. If you've had issues or think you might have issues, or they can provide you some resources to follow that take those preventative measures and just not even get to that point.
Very good. Well, that kind of sounds like a final thought, but I still want to ask you, any last thoughts that you want to part with, especially for somebody who is new to the road and maybe has that new entrant situation that you're in right now?
Yeah, I guess to kind of wrap it up in a tidy little bow, like you always like to say, I'd just say, don't let the FMCSA even get to the point where they identify you, unless you're trying to get that satisfactory safety rating. But what you need to do is just make sure you pass your new entrant audit if you're a new carrier. Make sure your equipment is well maintained, that you're following the traffic laws, and that you're running clean logs. If you're doing those kind of things, you're not going to have that target on your back. If you aren't doing those things, as soon as the FMCSA kind of sees that and kind of gets wind that you're not doing what you're supposed to do, they put that target on your back. And then things just get worse and worse and worse for you because you get inspected more often and they're watching you. And, if you don't make those adjustments after they really start looking at you, they're going to come in and they're going to do an audit and probably going to find things that you don't want them to see. And it's going to turn in and be messy. So again, it's that ounce of prevention, stay ahead of it, do the things that you're supposed to do right off the bat. And as long as you're doing that, they've got a ton of other companies that they can go look for that aren't doing it. And they're going to focus their efforts on them and not on you.
Last question for you then. If I'm an owner-operator, one truck operation, and I'm flying under the radar because I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing, can I go 10, 15, 20 years with an unrated rating, I guess?
It's actually more common than you would think. And yes, you absolutely can.
Well, there you go. So if anybody has any questions, seek us out on Facebook. Search Haulin Assets on Facebook. Go to haulinassetsllc.com and look for the show notes for this episode or any of the others, and just pop into the comments down there and let us know. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. We are not done with this regulatory stuff. We've got 2 more episodes of this, and Chris and I are going to marathon record this, and we're going to get these regulatory episodes done, and because this is really good information. It's like the taxes one, right? This is good stuff for everybody.
It's critical information for your business. I can't emphasize enough. Stay on top of it. And if you do, I know the regulations aren't fun, but you got to do it, and your life will be 10 times easier if you just stay on top of it from the beginning.
All right, Chris, let's record a couple more and then go into quarantine.
Sounds good.